Okay, so I don't know if I'll post this or if this will just be for me, but I so I always promised myself that I would be there for every possible thing that I thought that I would want somebody to be there for me, for my mother. And so I knew that eventually I would be standing with her as she passed. So a lot of things happened prior to her passing. She ended up going to the hospital because she fell, so she had hip surgery. After she had the surgery, they were going to try to do physical therapy with her. They said that they probably could get her to do it, but I was skeptical. So they couldn't get her to do physical therapy. So she basically did not recover from the hip surgery. She was in a wheelchair. They tried to get her up and down and everything, and so I think it was maybe a couple weeks after that she ended up back in the hospital. I think she was being unresponsive or something. I'm not sure exactly what the issue was, but they brought her back after they did tests on her. They brought her back to the facility. Then they said that she was diagnosed with dementia. I'm like, duh. Um, so the director of the facility and I think that she had a urinary tract infection, and when you get a urinary tract infection, even a healthy person, it starts to affect a lot of your mental capabilities. So I through my mother and through this experience with my mother, I've learned a lot of things about what your body is doing. So, anyways, fast forward, I think it was a couple weeks after that. Um, I visited her, and she really seriously, after the surgery, I walked in, I was like, did she have a stroke? Because her eyes were sunken, her cheeks were sunken, her chin was protruding. She was very, very skeletal looking. It scared the crap out of me. And so from that point, I was kind of looking at her, and I was like, I just had this feeling. I was like, she's not going to be around. Saying it out loud. I didn't say it out loud. I said it to myself. I said, I have a feeling she's not going to be around for very much longer. And so I visited her on the Saturday, and then I was I visited her on the Saturday, and then I got a phone call on Sunday. Um and I talked to the director of the facility on Saturday when I visited, because she just looked so pale, and she was she was just not the way she usually was. And so Sunday, I got a phone call in the morning from the director of the facility that she was being transported to the emergency room again. And I had the conversation the previous time with the director saying, I don't want my mother passing away inside of a hospital with a bunch of strangers. I wanted her at the facility with people that she's known this entire time. Known is subjective because they are familiar to her, whether she knew it or not. Having dementia doesn't mean that you don't recognize in the abstract way. That I think we sometimes take advantage of as fully aware people. So I went out there, and they had her in the hospital in the emergency room, and I just straight up told them, do everything that you can, give her antibiotics, give her fluids and stuff like that. There's no invasive procedures, and So they went through all these different things, and there was a couple things, options that they had, but my mother wasn't even well enough. If I gave them permission, she wasn't even well enough to go through the procedures. So we stayed in the emergency room. So the director, because it was a Sunday, the director was working with the hospital, or working with hospice, to get somebody to the facility that evening so that my mom could be put on hospice that evening. The hospital had to have have transportation there before 6:30 so that my mother could go to the back to the facility and be under hospice. Hospice wasn't going to be there past 6:30, so there was no way. So the hospital that she was at this time was different from the other hospital, and they screwed everything up. So the time came and went. My mother and I spent the entire evening in the emergency room with all these very strange people yelling and being very mean, and I saw prison people being escorted in and out. And so anyways, I spent this time with her, and eventually an ambulance ended up, or not, a transport came. That I told them, you're not taking her anywhere, because legally in California she cannot be returned to the facility without hospice on site. So she had to stay in the emergency room for the rest of the evening until the following day on Monday. So we get her back. We go through all this. She's on her, what do they call that? She's kind of on a hospice care, having morphine and Valium, and it calmed her. Even with all the craziness going on around us in the emergency room, it calmed her. She was able to sleep. So I was not able to sleep, because I was worried about her getting taken care of. So they turned off all the beeping machines whenever they realized my mother was going to be going into hospice care. So the morning the drivers came, they got her, we brought her back to the facility. I signed all the paperwork, got her on a hospice and everything. I went and got some food because I hadn't eaten. I think I was off on Monday, and then I was off on Tuesday. I went back to work on Wednesday. My mother was in hospice care at that time. She was eating. I was keeping in touch with the facility. So on Wednesday after work, I got a phone call from the director of the facility to get over there as soon as possible. So I talked to my boss, and I drove over there on Wednesday evening. And I was there with her, and I encouraged her. She didn't, while I was there, she didn't open her eyes. I held her hand, I rubbed her arm, I talked to her, I brushed her hair. I told her about things that we did while she was going through the dementia, and I told her my name. I said I was her daughter. I just basically talked to her and talked to her. She was starting to go through the phase just before somebody passes. The director of the facility was out of town, so she was keeping apprised of what was going on with the caregivers that were there, the med tech that was there. So he was keeping in touch with her, and she was telling me what was happening with my mom. And she told me, because when I got there, she seemed okay. And then after I was there for a little while, she started breathing like heavily at a little while. And then she wasn't in any pain because they were giving her morphine and lorazepam. I think that's how you pronounce it. And so she wasn't in any pain. She wasn't in any discomfort. She was going, and the director explained it. She's going because now you're there. She says, I didn't expect it to start going so fast. And I told her, I said, I told my mom it's okay to go, to leave this particular body that you no longer need. Leave it and go, and hopefully you'll be moving on to something more that you deserve as a person, that you can go and be free and be in peace and be whole again. And it wasn't very hard to say those things to her, because I was watching the lady that I love deteriorate every time I saw her. But after the hip surgery was when I knew it. I just had this feeling that it was closer. And it was, and a lot of people say that after something like that happens with even a regular elderly person, if they're not able to physically go through the physical therapy, it can be something that stops them from moving. Then they become bed bound, and you move them around and stuff like that. Then they get bed sores. So, which is one of the issues that my mother had. She had issues, but it didn't drag out for her. So I was talking to her and everything, and the director said, go ahead and talk to her and keep talking to her. It's the last thing before a person passes away. It's the last thing that goes. So the breathing was kind of like, and she would it would almost stop, and then it would and her eyes are closed, and she's not in pain. The director called it something, but it's just the stage just before they pass away. So I was holding her hand, and I kept telling her about things that we did together whenever I first started caring for her when she had dementia. I talked to her about some things that before the dementia. I just kept her. I kept her the focus of everything during that time period, because I wanted her to let go. I did not want my mother to die. Of course, I didn't want my mother to die, but I did not want my mother to be stuck in this body that was not a good environment for the lady that I love. The lady that gave birth to me. I did not want her in that particular environment anymore. So I was holding her hand, and I rested my head on her arm, and I was starting to get tired and everything, and it was about 11:20 p.m. that night. So not too long after I arrived there, she took her last breath. And I was waiting because she had the stop and go in her breath. So I was wondering if she was going to take another breath again. And I was by myself during this whole time. I was in the room with her by myself during this whole time. The caregivers and the med tech were taking care of other people, so I was there entirely by myself. So, she breathed out, and then she breathed back in again, and then I heard a and I saw her tongue move. And then that was the very last motion she ever made. And I was sitting right there with her. I started to cry, and I started to I felt very sad. because the lady that I loved passed away. The lady who gave birth to me passed away. So yeah, it was really rough and confusing at the same time. So her final arrangements had already been arranged. I had already taken care of all that. So the hospice came and they contacted the funeral home. So I stayed with my mom in the room. The caregivers came in and they washed her. They cleaned her arms and they cleaned her face. I turned off there was a oxygen machine. She wasn't on a breathing machine. She was just getting a little bit of oxygen, so I turned it off. They cleaned her up a little bit and got her ready and everything, and I stayed in the room with her. And I think that they came to get her at about 1:20 or 1:30. It was some really ungodly hour that they finally showed up and got her. So I signed the paperwork, and I took a blanket that she had, and then she had a stuffed animal kind of like this one, only she had a dog. This is a cat, and they're full of sand. Glass beads. It's a weighted animal to help anxiety and help calm people. So anyways, they took her, and then I took the dog and I took a blanket that she had, and I told the caregivers that they could pass on anything that was usable from my mom's. They could pass it on to any resident that didn't have the stuff that my mom had, to help care for another person. My mother would want that. My brother would want something like that. I wouldn't have any repurpose for the clothing that she had, and so I wanted to make sure that it did pass on to whomever was in need of that stuff. So I left, and they said that they would be in touch with me in a couple days. So I think I don't remember when I went back to work. So anyways, I started questioning about what was going on. I never questioned about what this life is about, or what I am about, or what we all are. I never, because I know I'm a daughter. My mother gave birth to me. I don't have any proof because I was like, I was a baby. So, but that happened because she took care of me, and stuff like that. I was a little bit out of it because I was like, okay, where is she? She took her last breath. What happened after she took her last breath? Where'd she go? That was a question that I had in my mind. What happened to the lady who was inside of the shell of the woman who gave birth to me? I started having all these questions, and I'm not a very religious person, so it kind of surprised me that I was having these questions. But I've never experienced being at the side of a bed whenever somebody takes their last breath. I have no problem. I knew I was going to be that person next to her whenever she passed, and I was okay with it because I would never want her to be alone during that time period. So I was questioning, and I'll make another video and I'll tell you why I'm not so afraid of dying now.